Thank you very much. I expect and I hope that it was sufficiently rich and elevating as an introduction, but what I really would like to say is I'm enormously honored to be here, and I was enormously honored when I had an invitation to come to this conference. When I received the email, I wrote back and said, are you aware that I haven't worked in discourse analysis for 15 years or more? And the return was, yes, we know. So I'm not here under false pretenses, even though maybe I should be. The kinds of things that I would like to talk about here are the sorts of things I've been doing over the last 15, 20 years in England, where I moved from being in a faculty which was to do with cultural studies and media studies and production to education. Education, as we all know, has become a politically highly sensitive issue, and therefore for academics enormously important. And it is enormously important socially to think about what kind of future we imagine for young people, and therefore what kind of education system they should experience. I have found it an enormously productive environment in which to work. As part of that, I've also become interested in education in other sites, for instance in clinical sites, and how do surgeons, people who operate on other people in order to make them better, how do they, for instance, learn the kinds of things that they need to know? And that's what I would like to talk about with you today.
Okay. Buenos días. Primero, el profesor Kress dijo que se siente honrado por la invitación. También comentó que cuando llegó y lo recibieron el comité de organización, él les preguntó si estaban al tanto de que hace más de 20 años que no trabaja con análisis del discurso. Le dijeron que sí, que de hecho estaban... ¿No se escucha? ¿Mejor? ¿Se escucha? Se puede subir el volumen si no se escucha. Y comentó que después de hacer ese cambio del análisis del discurso al trabajo semiótico, en Inglaterra y en una universidad que se dedica a la educación, reconoció que había una importancia social, política, relativa a los estudios semióticos y la educación que era relevante, y que hoy va a tratar su conferencia acerca de eso, incluso acerca de cosas relativas a la cirugía y a la manera que aprenden las personas que trabajan sin lenguaje verbal en este caso.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm sure that was much more articulate than what I said. So a tiny bit of a personal biography of all of this in academic, intellectual terms, with my very good friend Bob Hodge, who fortunately is sitting right there. In the 1970s, we, like many other people, began to think about how power works in the social. And in the early 70s, it was very common for younger academics to form Marxist reading groups. The common thing to do, which was sort of not traditional, was to talk about critique. Because we thought that by understanding how power works, then once we had made that obvious, then people would know how not to communicate and how not to make their presentations. We thought understanding power would lead to a change in the social. The social would come into crisis once people knew how power worked in representation.
¿Cómo? Have you changed it? Okay. El profesor hace mención al hecho de que en los 70 empezó a trabajar con el profesor Hodge, que está aquí presente en la primera fila por fortuna, según el comentario de Kress, y dice que lo primero que observaron era cómo funcionaba el poder y qué relación tenía eso con el discurso y con la construcción del discurso. La relación entre lo social y lo político en la construcción del discurso.
So together we started and worked about that. We taught together, and at weekends ignoring our families, which we would not now do, we talked endlessly about the relation between power and language, and how that could be kind of made telling in the world. We thought that the discipline in which we worked, linguistics, should be socially responsible.
La relación entre el poder y el lenguaje era lo que los ocupaba y sentían que tenía que haber un grado de responsabilidad en el análisis de los materiales lingüísticos sociales y su relevancia política.
Can you hear with this microphone? Can you hear? No? Sorry.
Hola, ¿se escucha mejor? ¿Mejor?
Better? Better. Okay. So we wanted to make linguistics a socially and politically useful discipline. And we thought by bringing the social into crisis, that was our task. So we did something which became known as critical linguistics, and which later on, of course, morphed into critical discourse analysis. And other people, Toyn van Dijk, for instance, involved in that are here. What was the result of our work? Well, linguistics did not reform itself. And the social has come into crisis, but not because of our work. The social is in deep crisis, and so the question is, what do we do when the social is in crisis? What do we do? And for me, the question, I answered that question for myself by saying, in an educational context, what we should do is to make available the kinds of insights, the kinds of resources we had formed in critical discourse analysis, but turn them around to make them into tools which would enable young people to make their own designs of their own meanings.
Okay. Bueno, la preocupación era preguntarse cuál era la utilidad social que tenía la lingüística y el análisis del discurso, y pensaron que la sociedad estaba en crisis y que la lingüística que está en crisis y no necesariamente por el desarrollo de la lingüística, y que la lingüística no estaba pudiendo dar cuenta de las condiciones del desarrollo de la discursividad y su relación con lo social y esa crisis. Entonces pensaron en cómo hacer para trabajar de una manera que eso tuviera una implicancia incluso para la educación y para que los educandos o los niños tuvieran conciencia de cómo producen sus propios diseños.
In the meantime, and my friend Bob and I again thought the focus on language was actually not sufficient to account for all of the meanings which affect us in our social lives or in our personal lives. And so we started doing a book which extended what we had done in the book called Language as Ideology into, as far as we could see, a much broader, much wider field. It was a book called Social Semiotics, and that has had its effect too. Partly maybe it led to my being invited here because people now talk about other ways of making meaning and their effects in the social world.
La intención entonces fue ampliar el marco de trabajo, y por eso trabajaron con términos como la ideología y el libro sobre ideología que escribió en los 70, y después el libro con Hodge acerca de la semiótica social.
So that is then the move from critique for me to design. Designing meaning in whatever forms and ways it seems relevant to the place in which I work and for the purposes which I have. That is what I would like to talk with you about.
Por eso es que hacemos este cambio de lo crítico al diseño, porque cree que es lo que conviene para los propósitos y las observaciones que se propone hacer a continuación.
The slogan which I use, the slogan which I use is the social is prior. Meanings are made in social action and interaction, and it is that action and interaction in social environments which shapes the semiotic world. So that is actually the foundation of what I want to say. The social is prior. Of course, that has a lot of consequences for how we proceed in the world.
Bueno, este es el eslogan al que se refiere el profesor, que es el que tengo a mi espalda y que sostiene que lo social y la interacción, la acción y la interacción social son lo que forma, lo que conforma, lo que moldea el significado y en eso lo semiótico.
And this slide here is simply to repeat what I've just said, but formulated in a specific way. If the social is prior, and theory attempts to account for the social, but also that theory is shaped in the social, then when the social changes, our theory needs to change. We cannot kind of continue with the theory of the 1970s, which assumed a certain kind of social in a situation which is now, as far as I can see, profoundly different.
Bueno, el profesor acaba de mencionar que esta diapositiva es más o menos para repetir lo que ya había dicho, lo cual está expreso en las palabras, pero que da cuenta de algunas diferencias que quiere comentar a continuación.
So that is what I want to show now. We now have more resources for making meaning, or rather, in our intellectual academic environment, we have more resources for doing that. We know, maybe uncomfortably, that the theory which was sort of okay to explain the social in the 1970s is not okay now to explain the social of the year 2015 and onward. I want to show you two examples. I choose very banal examples because I think it's in the banality of the everyday that actually meanings are made and become the non-banal. So my example here is this.
El profesor está advirtiendo que claramente las condiciones semióticas de la década del 70 no son las de la actualidad y que por eso los medios para analizar tales dispositivos tienen que ser necesariamente diferentes y que le interesa trabajar con materiales banales porque cree que en la superficie de la banalidad es donde pueden verse estas cosas con evidencia.
So what we have here is two packages of washing powder. And most of you will not have seen either of these, or if you've seen them, you will have forgotten them because they are banal, they're ordinary, they're not worth looking at. But I think when you look closely, for the first one, the one on the left, for instance, the resources of critical discourse analysis would have enabled us, by looking at the linguistic, and sort of with a bit of a look at the visual, would have enabled us to have said something about the ideologies which were dominant in the private domain, of course also in the public domain. We could have said something about gender, family, how these were constructed, how technology was seen. When we look at the image on the right, something has happened. The resources of discourse analysis, which focus on language alone, would tell us nothing. They would tell us that there is something called Purcell. But they wouldn't tell us about a profound social change from the conception of family and gender and what these things were about to the change which is embodied in the focus on an active, free child, male child, but never mind, girls maybe too. In other words, we've had both a profound social change marked in these two packages over a period of perhaps 20, 30 years, but we've also had a profound change in the forms of representation for which the former kind of theoretical model focused on language alone simply isn't sufficient. So I want these to be, as it were, a kind of a model for what I'm going to say from now on.
Bien, el profesor dice, bueno, estos son dos paquetes de jabón para lavar la ropa, uno de hace 30 años o 40 y el otro de los 90, si no recuerdo mal, y a él le parece que es un buen ejemplo para ver cómo en la banalidad de todos los días es evidente cómo los modelos lingüísticos ya no pueden dar cuenta de la construcción del significado en general en este tipo de de objetos semióticos y cómo eso movilizó su interés por pensar en un modelo semiótico más abarcador, por ejemplo, para pensar marcas de género, marcas sociales, etcétera, que no podrían analizarse solamente con los recursos de la lingüística.
The social has changed and the semiotic has changed. And if the social is prior, then I ask, first of all, what now are the social givens? What now are they? And also, which modes of representation carry the central meaning in each case? Those are the kinds of questions I would ask in relation to each of these. And what realizes what kinds of meanings? Those would be my kind of focal questions. Of course, behind it all is another question which remains constant. What do we mean by text? Are these packages of washing powder actually text? Should we treat them as text, or are they something else entirely? Okay.
Bueno, más o menos las preguntas que se hace el profesor son las que figuran en la filmina, y la pregunta fundamental con la que cierra es si podemos considerar estos objetos semióticos como textos.
Yeah. Okay. The question for me is, where I live, in the UK, UK stands for United Kingdom, which, as you know, is beginning to be entirely disunited. So right here and now, in the United Kingdom, what is the social like? What is the social like in which young people go into what can no longer in England be called an education system, because education is being privatized. It's being not just commodified, but also privatized. What is the social like? And what kind of theory do I need in order to account for that kind of social? Those are the kinds of issues that I want to know. But remember, I've moved from critique to design. I want to say, what do these young people need? What will they need to have productive social lives? What resources do they need? And do I need to give them to design their meanings in their social lives?
Bueno, la pregunta que se hace principalmente es cómo son las cosas aquí ahora. Él se refiere, como se sabe, al Reino Unido, trabaja en Londres y... ¿Digo bien? Do you work in London?
Yeah.
¿Cómo es el sistema educativo que ahora está privatizado? ¿Cuáles son las condiciones? ¿Qué recursos necesitan los chicos para producir significados? Por eso es que nos recuerda nuevamente que él está haciendo un pasaje de la crítica al diseño.
Okay, so what are the relevant questions, or rather, what are the relevant features of the social that I want to... I'm not going to give a sociological account of any detail, but here, for instance, are two things. I think I, as a person in that society, find around me that we have moved from a kind of notion of a collective into which I'm integrated into a kind of an accumulation of individuals. We've moved from integration to individuation. And the neoliberal capitalist market wants disintegration. It wants different kinds of individuals because it can kind of fill niche markets with that. But that is the world in which young people now have grown up for the last 30 or 40 years. And our schools are filled with young people who know this as the normal way of being in their social communities.
Bueno, tal como adelanta la filmina, la distinción que quiere hacer el profesor entre integración e individuación está marcada por la dominación del mercado, incluso en los contextos en los que se educan los niños, y ese paso o esa intención de individuación y de generar nichos es en la que hay que pensar ahora para pensar en términos semióticos y en cómo proveer recursos a los niños.
So from a situation in which I thought about the state and its society and my responsibility in a particular place in that, I now think about the market. The market says nothing about responsibility, nothing about kind of integration and collectivity. The market says choose. You have choice. as long as you have the means for making being active, choose. Young people come to school with the notion of I am active, I can be an agent in my own interests, I have choice. The school says, still, actually, we want you to kind of integrate into something which no longer exists, and there's an authority which tells you how to do that. That is the problem for the school. That is also the problem now for the kind of theory that I would like to develop so that we have a solid account of what goes on there.
Bueno, el mercado presenta un estado de lo social, una realidad social que es distinta de la que propone la escuela. El Estado y esa individuación a la que se refería plantea la capacidad productiva y de poder elegir, y en el colegio todavía se piensa en una concepción más integradora. Entonces la idea es prestarle atención a las condiciones sociales que propone el mercado y pensar cómo trabajar con eso en términos semióticos.
Okay, so the question is, what is the contemporary social and semiotic landscape like? That's the question. What is that landscape like? I think socially it is fragmented. What kinds of implication does that have for the semiotic? If the social is fragmented, what does it mean for the semiotic? For instance, what does a notion of social coherence mean when the social is fragmented, and how is it semiotically represented? We have notions of coherence from Hallidayan linguistics, very close, very detailed. Do they still work? That's the question. So I think that a world which is layered in very many different ways, a huge significant factor which we didn't think about before is generation, so that people older than, say, 45 have experienced a different social to those who are younger. But above all, I think the semiotic landscape is not just diverse, but it is provisional. By provisional, I mean that which happened yesterday is not a good guide for what might happen today, and will not tell me about what shall happen tomorrow. And so I need actually to have a theory which deals with provisionality rather than stability and convention. So that's the sort of sketch.
El profesor reconoce una diferencia en la manera de representar los significados y advierte una condición de provisionalidad distinta de la del pasado y que está evidentemente movilizada por las condiciones del mercado y su naturaleza. Eso es un pequeño esbozo, acaba de decir, de lo que va a decir a continuación.
So, what are these semiotic resources like? I'm not now going to give a kind of an account of them in any detail. This is not the point of this lecture. The point of this talk is to set out what I think is essential to do and how I think about my work in the place where I live. So, importantly, and this is where we now return, or rather come to, the notion of modality, mode and multimodality, but in a social semiotic frame. So the resources I think about are mode and its affordances, and of course some aspects of what a mode is about, and what affordances might be.
Bueno, en el contexto social semiótico al que se va a referir ahora se va a referir a los recursos semióticos, y uno de ellos es el modo y sus facilitantes, y una breve definición está presente en la filmina y ahora va a desarrollar el profesor.
Now, in the discourse analysis that I used to do until about the late 1980s, that was not a question, because linguistics had told me what language was like, whereas now I ask, what is a mode like? What is the material of a mode? And how is sound as a material different as a means for making meanings to, for instance, inscriptions on a surface? These were not questions which were asked before. What can I do with that? Of course, it has an effect on how one thinks about language, speech and writing, but this is a new question.
Estas no son preguntas que se hicieran antes con el análisis del discurso, cómo es un modo, cómo eso produce significado, cuál es la naturaleza material de los modos y cómo produce un significado a partir de tales condiciones.
And the notion of affordance goes both to what the material is like, what can I do with sound that I could not do with inscription, or I can't do with image, but also what kind of social work is constantly being done with this material to make it fit for what I want to do. So the notion of constantly remaking the resources which I have in meaning making becomes a central issue. No longer the stability of, well, we know what grammar is like, we know what language is like, but rather it is constantly in a moving situation. We ourselves and the persons with whom we interact are constantly reshaping these things.
La idea de cómo significa el sonido, el color y el resto de los posibles modos tiene una manera muy diferente de producir significado, y su naturaleza depende de la relación que establecemos continuamente, formándolo y conformándolo cada vez que los ponemos en uso, a diferencia de aprender cómo funciona la gramática y ponerla en uso en virtud de sus propias reglas.
Now, the smallest unit of semiotics is the sign. But now we ask a slightly different question, not what signs are there in speech and what signs are there in writing, or what signs are there in image, or what signs are there in gesture or in gaze, but rather in what way can we develop a theory which allows us to be specific about a sign in writing, but also specific about a sign in gesture, and how are they related. So it's a new kind of question. Signs are made by me in the process of sign making. I need a theory which says when I make a gesture of this kind, it has something to do with saying it happened very quickly. How do I have a theory like this?
Bueno, cada signo en cada uno de los modos tiene su propia forma de producir significado, y ese significado y ese signo se forman en el proceso de hacerse haciendo significado. Entonces la pregunta es bien diferente, y da el ejemplo de, por ejemplo, qué ocurre cuando hago, por ejemplo, este gesto. Y si me preguntara, por ejemplo, acerca de la velocidad en que lo hice y si eso puede producir significado, y en ese caso, ¿qué significado produce en ese contexto?
I want to show you a very small, a tiny example, and use it again as with the personal packages to show how I might have thought about it before and how I would think about it now. So my question about this image here is, what signs, what semiotic resources are in play here?
Ahora se va a referir a una interacción. Esta es una imagen que ahora nos va a contar de qué se trata, para mostrarnos la diferencia relacionándolo con los paquetes de polvo para lavar la ropa, y mostrarnos cómo hubiera trabajado en su momento con los recursos del análisis del discurso, y cómo trabaja ahora, por ejemplo, con una imagen como la que sigue y su situación.
So, traditionally, I would have transcribed what was said. And here is a tiny example of the transcript.
Tradicionalmente él hubiera transcripto lo que se dijo para analizarlo en términos discursivos, y esta es la transcripción de lo que se dijo en esa intervención.
And then I would have said, well, this is a form, an utterance. I might have said it's a clause, I don't know. But I would have pointed to the fact in, say, critical discourse analysis, that there's no assignation of agency. There is no assignation of who is affected by this utterance. In other words, it just happens. A little bit counterfactually to what the world is like, and that would have been more or less the end of my... Because I have a Hallidayan background, I might have said, actually they said it with a particular kind of intonation. They would have said something like, the walks have doubled, or have doubled. The woman who's kind of being asked the question here, the question that she was being asked was by the man who's sitting on the right, who is the head of human resources in this firm. He said, what changes do you think have happened, and what are they, what's most important about them? And she said, the walks have doubled. And I might have left my critical discourse analysis at that point. She's made two information units out of one kind of, let's say, syntactic units, a clause. But you can see something else has happened here, because she has made a gesture. She had her hands together before, and as she says, the walks have doubled. She does this. The walks have doubled from here to there. It's become bigger. The task has become bigger. The person who's asked her the question has turned his way to the paper on which he makes notes. He's not now available to kind of be challenged. But the other person who's actually going to be the head, or he's the head of her department to be, he looks at her. So she engages him in a gaze. And while she holds this gesture, she doesn't let go with a gaze. She's not being verbally impolite or aggressive or threatening, but she is not letting this person get away without answering the question by means of gaze and by use of gesture. Now that to me is absolutely crucial, and if you ask me which was more important here, the spoken utterance or the fact that I'm looking at this person who will be my boss and who should give me an answer or should know about this, this is the kind of question that I now ask in a social semiotic frame and in a multimodal frame. There are at least 4 different modes.
Bien, bueno, esta es una entrevista de trabajo a la mujer. La están entrevistando para darle un puesto de trabajo eventualmente, y lo que se pregunta el profesor dice, según el modelo lingüístico o discursivo con el que trabajáramos, inicialmente uno diría que esto es un enunciado o una cláusula según el caso, y como él viene de la escuela halidiana podría reconocer 2 unidades de entonación y hacer interpretaciones en virtud de ese tipo de contenido, pero que hay algo más que está ocurriendo en la entrevista que es muy significativo, que relativo al gesto, que excede los límites de los modelos que acabo de mencionar. Entonces la semiótica social y la multimodalidad en particular se propone pensar en cómo eso produce significado y advertir, por ejemplo en una interacción como esta, cómo el gesto tiene una relevancia no solo en las manos de la persona que acaba de hacer la pregunta o de contestarla, sino de la persona que hizo la pregunta, que mira para abajo y escribe en el papel, y aparentemente no tiene la voluntad de contestar.
Power has not gone away. The way we see the social now and the way we might want to account for it has changed. And she uses not language, not speech to assert her power, but she uses gaze and she uses gesture. So it's not that she isn't asserting her power or capable of asserting her power, but she uses those means which are difficult for her bosses or her future bosses to challenge.
Bueno, evidentemente la manera de organizar el significado está en la gestualidad de la comunicación y no solo en el discurso. Eso es lo que alcancé a
escuchar. So let's move on from there slightly. What is happening here, I think, is work. The interviewee is made to work. She works. The human resources manager works. The line manager works. I call it, what's happening here is semiotic work. And semiotic work, the moment we call it semiotic work, we say who is working and what work do they do. All of them are working, and all of them, given what I said earlier about science, are changing the resources which are at use in their work. So work changes the work, it changes the tools, it changes that which is worked on, and semiotic work is no different. It changes the social, but it changes also the social resources.
Bueno, el trabajo que están haciendo todos y cada uno tiene un impacto en la producción del significado. Cada uno trabaja sobre el significado, y la manera en que trabaja sobre lo que hace cambia las cosas que hace, cambia las herramientas con las que trabaja, y eso tiene una importancia relativa a la semiótica social.
We're good. One more. Okay. The question then is, are we prepared to recognize the semiotic work? Are we prepared to recognize it, or do we just dismiss it? Formerly, I would say in the kind of critical discourse or critical linguistics that I used to do, I would not have recognized it. I would not have seen it. I didn't have the resources to see it. I now do. The other question is, does my position say I must recognize the work of this particular person? That becomes now for me a question which I've raised in my abstract, the question of ethics, because I want ethical, and a theory which is ethically oriented. It says people all work, they're equal in the work they do, or rather they're equal in working, and I want to have that work recognized. I want recognition given to the work that everybody does. That is the point that I would draw from this.
El profesor se hace la pregunta ahora si somos capaces de reconocer este universo multimodal de producción de sentido, y en el sentido de ser capaces de reconocerlo y de valorarlo. Entonces ahí es donde viene la parte ética de su planteo. Necesitamos ser capaces de valorar también ese tipo de producción de significado.
So, English isn't very good in terms of providing me with signifiers what I want to say. In German, I can say, I see what you do, and I have the word Anerkennung, which is...
Valoración.
No, I think Wertschätzung is Valoration. Anerkennung is...
Reconocimiento.
Recognition. Yeah? I want both the recognition, but also the valuation of what I can now recognize. That is the important aspect of that. And am I prepared? But now I have a theory with which I can challenge somebody who does not provide recognition or valuation. That seems to me essential. Now,
bueno, yo ya había adelantado esa distinción que habíamos comentado del alemán con el profesor entre la idea de poder reconocerlo en términos de poder prestarle atención o de advertirlo, y la idea de poder valorarlo. Ese es un punto específico relativo a la idea de su propósito ético del análisis.
And that applies to all work. So when a 3.5-year-old does something like this, and I apologize, I've used some of these examples before, but then I've used some of the words I've now used before too, and you use words all the time, so we'll leave it there. But this example here is familiar to all of those who've had children around them at some stage, and the children have learned to write. And this young person has proudly shown somebody, look, I've been writing. And of course, when she leaves the kitchen, normally, what is the Spanish word for this?
Garabato.
In English, scribble. Somebody has scribbled, sort of, oh, that's lovely, you're writing. I don't say, that's lovely, scribble. But when the writer has left the kitchen, I take it and I put it in the bin. But when I think that she has done semiotic work, I can't do that. I have to acknowledge the semiotic work she's done, and I have now got the task of understanding what principles she's used in this kind of semiotic work. That's the job. I might not be able to do it. In this case, luckily, somebody who was doing a PhD with me said, oh, my daughter Sarah is also learning to write. She's also 3. And she said, I'll bring you an example of her writing. And there's young Sarah's scribble. Now, it's a very different kind of scribble. Is that an accident, or is there a reason? Or is it maybe because little Sarah learned to write in Taiwan in a character-based script system, which looks very different? So both Sarah and Emily have attempted to abstract elements from that script system and have had a principled account of the script system, but not necessarily in terms that I would have acknowledged immediately. So Emily says, in the script system of my culture, there are elements which are repeatable, they're kind of linked, and some of them recur. And Sarah says, in the script system of my culture, every element is different. They're not linked and they don't recur.
Bueno, lo primero que dijo el profesor fue que les pide disculpas porque ha usado estos ejemplos en otras ocasiones, pero que todos usamos también las mismas palabras para referirnos a distintas cosas eventualmente. Y lo que quiere mostrar en este caso es cómo estos son garabatos de niños que tuvieron la voluntad de escribir, y que en general estas este tipo de trabajo semiótico que efectivamente el profesor reconoce como tal, uno lo ve y dice, qué lindo el garabato que hizo mi hijo, lo hace un bollo y lo tira a la basura, pero en realidad es posible reconocer principios de trabajo semiótico incluso en estos objetos que aparentemente son garabatos. Y le pasó que una vez que le mostró a una colega el primer garabato de la escritura occidental, ella le dijo, yo tengo un garabato también hecho por mi hija, de otra cultura evidentemente, y ahí él encontró con claridad al compararlos que había ostensiblemente principios reconocibles del trabajo semiótico que estaban haciendo los chicos y que eso no era solamente un garabato. Entonces vuelve a esta idea de la valoración y de la capacidad de reconocerlo como principio ético del modelo.
Now, of course, I've taken a kind of extreme example because I think the hypothesis about semiotic work applies no matter who the worker, and it applies in classrooms. The next two examples, which I will hardly talk about, are from science classrooms in London, where you have 13, 14-year-olds learning about cells and what they are like, but where the teacher, and I'm not in any way blaming the teacher does not have the resources for recognizing what the children have done. So groups of 4 have constructed a slide which is put under a microscope, and the teacher says, when you've done that, have a look at what you see, and afterwards I want you to write what you did, and I want you to draw what you saw. But I don't want you to put your image at the top of the page because he fears they might have a very big image and therefore very little writing. Writing obviously being valued and image maybe not. So here is what 2 of the 4 young women have seen. This first woman has done something like this. She has got the writing at the top, except he also said don't use color pencils because color obviously is not scientific. So she's drawn, or rather she's written what she said. It's a procedure. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and then she's drawn very accurately the eyepiece of the microscope and what she could see in it. And of course, while they were working around it, she said the teacher had said it might look like the cells in a honeycomb. She said it looks more like a wavy weave to me. The other one has drawn something entirely different. She's put the image at the top, but it's entirely different. So how do we account for the difference in the drawing when people have looked at the same slide? Well, one reason is that in the handout sheet they had to do this job. At the bottom it said, what you might see, or what you will see, might look like bricks in a brick wall. So in other words, the point is we select from the prompt. In this case, 4 lessons on plant cells. We select from a massive amount of stuff that which seems most significant to us at the moment, and that's what she's done. The teacher does not recognize the difference in genre between procedure and recount. A procedure is epistemologically very different to a recount. Of course, both are scientifically proper. The teacher is not able to see that the drawings are different. One says, I've drawn what theory tells me I should. The other says, scientific drawing has to be absolutely as accurate as I can possibly make it. The resources are missing for the teachers. The recognition is impossible. The children are not given the means of kind of dealing with what they've done. So there's a kind of a full stop. My next example is very different.
Do you want me to say something about it?
Julian, I warned him that once I'm started, I can't stop.
Bueno, el profesor decía que con estos mismos principios y estos materiales es posible trabajar con cualquier objeto semiótico, por ejemplo en el aula con los chicos, y se refiere a un ejemplo de un caso en una clase de ciencias en la que los chicos tenían que observar la célula en el microscopio. Después durante y después en una clase en la que habían abordado el tema también en términos teóricos con el manual. Y la consigna era escribir qué era lo que habían hecho y dibujar qué era lo que habían visto. Una de las consignas que el profesor advierte interesantes para evaluar el valor social que se le da, por ejemplo, a la imagen, es que en la consigna se pedía que el dibujo estuviera abajo, probablemente para que el dibujo no ocupara la totalidad de la hoja y que el chico terminara escribiendo muy poco. Sin embargo, eso parece haber sido transgredido por el alumno, porque hay uno que lo hace arriba y otro que lo hace abajo. Y la pregunta que se hace el profesor es ¿qué recursos tiene el docente para reconocer las diferencias que hay en la imagen? Y una cosa que advierte del segundo caso es que en el manual decía, había como una pregunta retórica que inducía a pensar la célula en términos de los ladrillos en una pared, porque la consigna decía, es posible que usted vea la célula en esos términos. Y la pregunta que vuelve cada vez es si el docente tiene los recursos para verlo, si los tiene para valorarlo, y si el chico tiene conciencia de su capacidad y de lo que hace cuando está trabajando con la producción de significado.
The last example comes from a clinical setting. And what it does now, it might make some of you think, what's this got to do with discourse analysis or with the kind of work I do? In the notion of multimodality, it's assumed that no mode occurs on its own. It always occurs in the context of other modes, and we will not understand what a particular mode is doing until we understand what the other modes in that same context are doing, as the gesture and the gaze and the speech and the intonation showed before. So I want to show you now something which is about touch, the semiotics of touch. Surgeons, medical people use the semiotics of touch, and how do you teach it? You can't describe it in words, you can't draw it really, so here are two examples.
Bueno, comento brevemente. El próximo ejemplo y el último se va a referir a algo que aparentemente, o posiblemente la gente se pregunta qué tiene que ver esto con el análisis del discurso o con nuestra tarea en este caso, pero la idea es poder reconocer todos los modos y cómo producen sentido, particularmente en sus distintos casos, y él se va a referir ahora a el tacto con un caso de una cirugía.
So here then the examples. Somebody has come into a hospital with a lump on his stomach, or rather on his belly, on his tummy, and after several tests, x-rays and ultrasounds, it's still been impossible to decide whether this is a lipoma, a kind of a fatty tissue lump, or a hernia. So when the two people who will conduct this minor operation come to it, they don't know. They will have to rely on touch to sort of feel what it might be like and what its extent is, and this is what they do. There's a woman who's in the second year of her training to become a surgeon, and there's a third year medical student who is simply there for the first time. What you will see now, first of all, is the touch of the third year medical student. He's unfamiliar with that whole domain. What you see now is the touch, and look very closely, the touch of the second year surgeon.
Lo que vamos a ver a continuación son las diferencias entre... Este es un caso de un paciente que tiene un bulto en el vientre y tienen que averiguar si se trata de un linfoma o de una hernia, y el único recurso para averiguarlo evidentemente es el tacto. Y la observación que quiere hacer el profesor es entre el tacto de un interno, de un estudiante, y el tacto de un profesional. Y ahora quiere que vean con atención la diferencia entre una imagen y la otra.
Okay. So I think among all the other things, thinking about the change social, thinking about the new resources that we have to attend to, we also, I think, at the moment need to have a theory of communication which is appropriate to what goes on here. That somebody provides something and somebody kind of sees something and responds to it. Sign making is part both of the person who initially makes the sign and then the person who responds in all of these cases here.
El profesor dice que tenemos que pensar en un modelo de la comunicación que pueda incluir a todos estos modos. Por ejemplo, este tipo de comunicación que no involucra la palabra y que es tan importante acaso como la palabra, que tiene que ver con el tacto, como en este caso.
Okay. Now, because we're getting a little bit short of time, I might rush just a tiny bit now, but Julian will still have time to kind of translate. So we have to rethink communication and think of it as social interaction. There's always action, and it's kind of action on on the part of all the participants.
La idea de repensar la comunicación y tener presente la acción y la interacción y el trabajo semiótico que eso implica en todas esas partes, esos integrantes.
In this operating theatre, you can see just on the very right-hand side, somebody with a black kind of uniform on, the operating theatre technician. You can see closest to you the scrub nurse, the chief surgeon, the assistant surgeon, and the anaesthetist.
En esta imagen se puede ver al técnico, al doctor que hace la cirugía, a la persona que se ocupa de la esterilización.
Now, communication here happens hardly ever by speech. I mean, the surgeon might talk, but he might talk about his holidays or about golf or something. But it happens by gaze. The anaesthetist might be looking at the assistant surgeon, or the scrub nurse might look at the head surgeon, and they say, "Why is she looking at me? What is there in this kind of flow of action that I should be attending to?" 5 people, or rather 4 different professions, technician, nurse, surgeon and anaesthetist, with their own practices, their own ways of seeing something, come together to act on a specific, a shared kind of issue, and in that action they have to kind of cross the boundaries of their disciplinary and professional kinds of backgrounds and come together and do what they need to do.
Bueno, en esta sala de operaciones es evidente que la comunicación pasa apenas por la palabra, que pasa mayormente por la mirada, y que cada una de las personas que están trabajando sobre el mismo objeto tienen una manera de trabajarlo y una manera de cooperar para que la comunicación se organice en virtud del modo que es la mirada y el punto de vista que tienen sobre el objeto y la relación que establecen con él.
The point about this is that communication depends on somebody saying, "This must be for me." She or he recognizes something in that flow of communication, draws it out and responds to that. Communication depends not on the sender of a message, but on the interpretation of somebody who says, "This part of the prompt is for me and I will respond." That's changed our notion of communication totally. It makes the interpreter central to the effectiveness of communication.
Cada uno de los integrantes de esta situación comunicativa reconoce qué parte de la situación le corresponde y la centralidad no está puesta en el mensaje, sino en el lugar que le toca a cada uno de los integrantes, y está más puesta en la recepción y la relación del punto de vista que en la centralidad del objeto semiótico.
If you translate the notion that communication has happened when there's been interpretation to the classroom, the person who is central in the classroom now is the learner and her or his interpretations. That changes our notions of teaching and learning fundamentally. And we now cannot ignore the semiotic work of the learner in the classroom. We have to attempt to understand the principles of that. Now, I will now rush through my next examples to come to a final one, because there is coffee to be had in a little while.
Si traducimos eso al aula, tenemos que pensar que el foco de nuestra atención en términos semióticos tiene que ser el interpretador, el interpretante, que es en este caso el estudiante.
Just leave that up for a moment while I flash through the others. This is from a museum visitors project, but I won't say anything about it. And I won't say anything about this either, except maybe to say something after all. A lot of people now say, well, I do multimodality in my research. In fact, I've always done multimodality. I've always been interested in images. What's new? there are some things that are new. For instance, in changing mode, you change ontology and epistemology. To go back to the example of the cells, after 4 lessons, one teacher says to the class assembled, she says, "Can somebody tell me something about plant cells?" And a young woman puts up her hand and she says, "Yes, miss, a cell has a nucleus." And she says, "Good." And she says, "Susie, can you come to the front and draw that?" A cell has a nucleus, 2 entities connected by a verb of possession. So Susie gets to the front and draws this. Now, the point is that the mode of the visual, of image, asks totally different questions about the world, namely, not what does this thing have, but rather where is the nucleus placed in relation to the core in the cell, close to the cell wall. Is it big? Is it small? Is it a circle? Is it a lump? Completely different questions are asked by the image than are asked by word or by writing, by speech or by writing. My friend John Ogborn, who was professor of science education at the time when we did that jointly, he said, "Do you mean that all modes make an epistemological commitment?" And yes, the answer is each mode makes a different epistemological commitment. So it is not simply I've always used images, but rather in changing from this mode to that mode, I changed epistemology and ontology.
Bueno, el profesor dice que en muchos casos le ha pasado que cuando él comenta de qué se trata la multimodalidad, la mayoría de la gente dice, sí, esto no tiene nada de nuevo para mí, yo he hecho multimodalidad toda mi vida. Pero pone este ejemplo de un caso en un aula donde hablaban de ciencias naturales y una profesora o maestra pregunta si alguien sabe algo de las células, de las plantas, y una alumna dice, sí, yo sé, y dice, una célula tiene un núcleo. Entonces la maestra le pide si puede pasar al pizarrón y dibujarlo, y hace el dibujo que vimos y que vemos ahora en la pantalla. La observación que hace el profesor es que eso representa 2 compromisos epistemológicos distintos, porque la información semiótica que recibimos del dibujo, la disposición en el espacio, la relación con el centro, etc., es bien distinta de la información textual que tenemos por el enunciado, una célula tiene un núcleo. Entonces la idea de que la multimodalidad está poniendo en el foco el hecho de que tenemos una relación epistemológica y ontológica distinta cuando usamos distintos modos.
Okay, I'll rush on a bit more. I'll finish with a 2-minute example of the website of a restaurant in Sao Paulo. So those of you who are here from Sao Paulo, this is a little advertisement, although I'm not going back there, so there's nothing in it for me. I want to say the principles of composition and the principles of making texts are fundamentally different now in this world which is market-oriented, where the consumer has choice, exercises her or his choice. We have many modes to make the meanings, where the linear text with the authority of the author has given way to the modular text, where you make a choice, where you enter a website, for instance, and of course a restaurant is classical in that. It's not an absence of power. The restaurant still wants you to do what it might want to do, but it does it by different means. So here is the mission statement. This restaurant has a mission statement, like all institutions must have. And it uses a herb, and we couldn't find a Spanish or maybe a Portuguese word for lemongrass.
Capizidreto. Okay. En español encontramos hierba de limón o citrón. No, francamente no es un uso corriente. Ok. Limoncito también.
Whatever it is, there's a reason for using this particular kind of herb with its scent and its clear look its texture as a kind of a complement, the kind of embodiment of what the mission statement is attempting to say, but it says it in a very different way. The mission statement could not talk about lemongrass and its qualities. So that's the first thing. 2 modules, each does something else. They stand in a syntagmatic relation, which is meaningful. Then the restaurant kind of proceeds mainly by image communication. You see what you might get. It shows, for instance, then also, of course, who the head chef is. So the head chef is a person, she's on the right here, she looks back from her job to you. So the principles of composition are very different, multimodal. What mode is used for what kind of thing, which is dominant. And how is the reader, the potential person engaging with it, actually addressed? I think this is, for me, a kind of a banal example, and an example which shows all the aspects of what we used to attempt to do with critical linguistics, with critical discourse, or other kinds of discourse analysis, but now much, much enriched, and I think appropriate theoretically to the contemporary world. The website of... now I've given the name of the, if you go one further, of the restaurant Capim Santo, can be used as an exploratory site for how multimodal communication works, how subjectivities of the person who might come and visit the restaurant is constructed, what modes are used for what is the possibility of linearity as against modularity. All these questions come into the foreground. We need the kind of theory that can explain the banality of this object in its rich and significant effects on all of us. Thank you very much. Before I say thank you, Julian, thank you so much for all the work you've done in translating the PowerPoint and for the incredibly demanding task of translating what I'm saying. Thank you.